day 14 of the 30-day solo podcast challenge. I'm David Hooper from bigpodcast.com. My job is to help you grow a big audience for your message and a big audience for you. Because this project here, this 30 days of solo podcasting, this is about you. It's about clarifying your message. It's about you improving your delivery. And it's about giving you the skills that will help you to make more money with podcasting and make more money with the business behind your podcast. You're going to have flexibility. You can release episodes when you want. You can change things up when you want. And you're also going to develop skills that will translate elsewhere. Communication skills, including speaking, emailing, organization. If you've got a blog, if you're giving a speech, your speeches, your emails, your blog posts, any kind of communication you have is going to be better organized because of the things that we are working on in the 30-day solo podcast challenge. If you have not already done this, I want you to listen to the intro episode first. This explains the what and why of everything happening here, and you can get it at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll have the entire process there at bigpodcast.com/subscribe, all 30 days. And this thing, it builds upon itself. This isn't random, what I'm talking about. What I'm doing is giving you little elements that each fit together in a very organized way. So when you get to the end of this, you've got all these things that you can put in those emails, those speeches, those podcast episodes that you're doing. If you're a salesman, those sales calls, those sales meetings. This is important, and that's why I want you to go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe and make sure that you're getting the entire thing, not just this episode. Previously, we talked about common misconceptions. The day before that, hurdles. These are the things that keep your listeners from where they want to be. Today, the focus, this is what I call the HeartBreaker. And it's really geared more for nonfiction, talk-focused podcast, but it can also be modified like some of the other topics we've talked about on the 30-day solo podcast challenge to be personal if you want to share something about yourself. And sharing something about yourself, that's important. Part of what we're working on here, it's not just your hosting skill, it's things that you can do to get more connected with listeners. And if you want to look at it like this, the opposite of that, things you can do for listeners to become more connected to you. This is the question that I want you to answer, and this is how it connects to what we talked about for the last couple of days. What breaks your heart about the things that happen, the results that come from those common misconceptions and the hurdles that we talked about over the last couple of days? I'm going to explain this a little bit more and talk about why this is important. This is going to show your humanity, for one, but it's also going to show your awareness of what is happening in your world. You need to be in touch with listeners for listeners to be able to connect to you. You might have heard this saying in sales and marketing. You want to join the conversation that your customer is already having in his head. And that's the same for podcasters. You want to join the already existing conversation that your listeners are having. That shows you're connected to them, that you understand them. They have that feeling of being understood because of this. And the reason that I use the word breaks your heart is because I want you to add some emotion to this. Again, we're trying to show your humanity. Listeners don't want that nameless, faceless host. And you don't want to be somebody who could be replaced without listeners even knowing it. Let me give you an example of the type of story that I want you to record here. What breaks your heart about those misconceptions and the hurdles and the results that come from those things? This is something that's a little bit different in that it's not my story. It's a related story that I saw, though. It's on a site called The Mighty, and I'll have this linked in the episode notes, by the way. I don't know if you want to call it an essay, a blog, a diary, but the title is How Podcasting is Helping Me Embrace My Stutter. Again, this is by James Hayden. Over the past year and a half, I've had the opportunity to appear on a couple of podcasts to discuss my journey with stuttering and my book. It hit me recently that these appearances are another sign of me embracing and accepting my stutter. If you had told my 21-year-old self, or hell, my 23-year-old self, that he would be appearing on podcasts to openly talk about stuttering and openly stutter on them, he would have laughed at you. 21-year-old me would never dream of openly talking about stuttering to his friends and family, much less strangers. 23-year-old me would have hesitantly done it, but would have hoped and prayed no one he knew heard it, nor would he have shared it on his Facebook page. Today at 26, I'm constantly looking for platforms to share my voice and my story. Although I've only done 2 podcasts, they've given me the biggest opportunity to get far out of my comfort zone and further embrace my biggest vulnerability. Let me explain how. My biggest insecurity was, and if I'm being completely honest, at times still is, the fact that I stutter. It quickly introduces itself whenever I talk, and in that moment, my audience is seeing me at my most vulnerable. Yet during the infinite times my vulnerability is quickly introduced in everyday life, it's to a small audience, and they can tell by my facial expressions that it's no big deal. That's clearly not the case with a podcast. On a podcast, the listener can only hear me and every fine and intimate detail of my stutter, without my facial expressions saying it's okay. On a podcast, my audience isn't the 1 to few hundred people I'm talking to, but rather the entire population. On a podcast, those intimate details aren't gone in an instant, but rather are recorded for posterity. That's a concept I still grapple with. My biggest vulnerability is now recorded and will be available for all to hear. Let me give you a little bit of background on this and why this caught my eye. I've actually talked about this subject, the subject being stuttering, before. I'll get into that in a minute, but it's not really about that. It's much bigger. It's about the importance of sharing a message, even if the message or messenger isn't perfect. I wrote an article on my blog about a podcaster named Pedro Pina, and he does a podcast called My Stuttering Life. Since then, I've interviewed him. We talked more about this subject. All of these things, Pedro's podcast, the article from James Hayden that I just read, and also my audio interview with him, I'll have linked in the episode notes for this episode. Pedro tweeted something about that original article, and it was basically a message that said this. It said, "Thanks for doing the article." And in that tweet, he mentioned being what he calls a PWS, person who stutters. And that was months ago. And every week, I get several people, and I'm not exaggerating this, every week, multiple people retweet it, they like it, they respond to it. And this has been happening for months. I want you to think about this. How long does the average tweet last? If you were to go on Twitter right now and post something, a few minutes, maybe an hour, certainly by tomorrow, it will be gone. So think about that. For something to go out on Twitter and still have this kind of response where multiple people are responding to it every week, months after it was originally posted, it's got to be an important message, and it has to be something that people are searching for. I think we all worry about being the perfect host. That's why on yesterday's episode, day 13, there's a blooper reel attached. And it's not all the bloopers that I made, but it's enough of them so you can get an idea that I am not as smooth as you were hearing right now. I make a lot of mistakes when I'm recording these episodes. I make a lot of mistakes when recording every episode that I do. But that's why there's editing. And thank God, it's not like those old days when I started in radio with the magnetic tape, the razor blades, taping those pieces of magnetic tape together after I had physically cut out the ums, the ahs, the stuttering, the stammering, any kind of problems that I had in my speech. A lot of people, maybe you're one of them, and I've certainly been there at times, we wait until something is perfect. We wait until it is flawless before we release it to the world. Sometimes that's our skill set as a host, but sometimes that's the message that we want to get out, the topic, our knowledge. And I want you to think about Pedro, again, the podcast, My Stuttering Life. He is just talking about his life. That's nothing special, unless you stutter and you think you're alone. In that case, it's really important. It's very special. So I want you to think about that with your message. And I want you to think about that, not only on today's assignment, but as you move forward with your podcast, as you move forward with your email, your speeches, the other communication that you're involved with. It sounds so trite. And I hate the people, they say, oh, everybody should have a podcast. Everybody should go have a blog. I don't believe that. I think we need to work on these things, and I think we need to make them better. And that's why I've got the 30-day solo podcast challenge. And you being here, you believe that too. I think we need to work on ourselves, get better, lead interesting lives so we have stories to communicate with people and experiences that relate to other people. So I don't think that everybody needs a podcast. I don't think podcasting is precious, but I don't think we just need to throw everything and anything out there. With that said, there's something amazing about what each of us is doing and the lives each of us is living. We need to tap into that. That's what I'm trying to do over these 30 days. I'm trying to get you to see what you bring to the table, because you probably don't know what it is that makes you a great podcast host. You're probably too close to what you do, too close to the knowledge that you have to know that what it is you bring to the table is special. Most of the time when I work with people, broadcasters, podcasters, entrepreneurs, people spreading a message, the reason they think people are listening, it's not that. It's something completely different. So hopefully with these exercises, you're finding other things that you have to communicate and other ways people have to get connected to you. I don't want to go too far out on a tangent, but I do want you to think about your listeners, their hurdles, the things that are standing in the way for them. If you've got an entertainment podcast, maybe you're thinking about your own hurdles, the things that are standing in the way for you, your blocks. And I want you to share that story. This is the action step. I want you to get a piece of paper, a pen. I want you to outline your episode, 3 things, an intro. You can revisit the previous couple of episodes, maybe talk about those hurdles, talk about the blocks people are trying to go around to make their lives better. Talk about your blocks, your hurdles. Get to the meat. Talk about why it's heartbreaking. Really connect with that. What is at stake because of these hurdles? What are you being kept from? What are your listeners being kept from? And then the final part of this outline, I want you to wrap it up in a nice bow. Bonus, there can be an action step. How are you going to blast through that hurdle? How are you going to go around it, under it, over it? I can't emphasize enough how important stories are. And this is your opportunity to really dive deep into your story and into a story that listeners are going to be able to connect to. Show your humanity. Again, that's why I use the term, what breaks your heart? Show that emotion. Don't be afraid. Outline it, record it. You don't have to release it. But if you do, I want you to upload it. I want you to send it to me. You can get me through bigpodcast.com. I would love to hear it. I feature a lot of people from the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge in my newsletter. I will help you spread that message if you want me to. Before you get into that, before you outline, before you record, go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Make sure you are subscribed to this podcast. Make sure you've gone through the intro so you know what it is that I'm doing. I want you to go through every single day of this. Again, these things fit together. And in a couple of days, I'm going to share with you how working on things like this, the things in this program, has helped me. I'm going to give you a story, and everybody else is going to think that it's boring, except for you. It's like Pedro connecting with his audience. I'm going to tell you a story, and as a podcaster, you're going to be like, I get it. I get it. And what happened to me, I want to happen to you. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you get that episode in a couple of days. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. While you were there, make sure you get my free podcast toolkit. It's got episode templates, social media templates. It's got guest contracts, so you don't get into any kind of dispute with guests. They know what they're getting into. They know how you're going to use the material. You don't have to go back and forth. Oh, can you edit this out? Nope. That's not going to happen when you use my guest contract. All of those things are free. You can get them and more at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Thank you for listening to the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge. Hit bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Subscribe. Then I want you to go outline that story. What breaks your heart about those hurdles? What are the results that come from those hurdles and people not getting around them? And talk about it. Send it to me. I'll see you tomorrow on the next episode of the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge. I am not as smooth as you were hearing right now. I make a lot of mistakes when I'm recording these episodes. I make a lot of mistakes when recording every episode I did. I make a lot of mistakes when recording every episode that I did. But that's why there's editing. I'll see you tomorrow on the next day. I'll see you tomorrow on the next episode of the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge.